Well, we live in a generation that believes that climate change is, in fact, a very real and present danger to our world, and that it's necessary to spend billions of tax dollars to find a solution as quickly as possible. But is this actually true? And if so, are we getting any tangible bang for our buck? Joining us today from Memphis, Tennessee is Dr. Cal Beisner. He is the national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance, which is a conservative Christian public policy group. So glad to have you on today, Cal, once again.
Great. Great. Thanks very much. Really good to be with you.
Absolutely. So, Cal, you recently wrote an article in townhall.com about an interview with one of the world's top experts on energy, Václav Smil, which was published in New York Times Magazine. So you say that this kind of dashed a bucket of cold water in the face of millions of climate alarmists. So maybe can you give us a brief overview of what happened?
Yeah, well, what happened was the reporter went to a great expert hoping to get that expert to say what the reporter wanted him to say. But in fact, the expert just simply refused to do it. Václav Smil is really probably one of the world's top one experts on energy, on how we provide energy, how we use energy in our everyday life, how energy is developed and spread around, what are the costs, what are the engineering mechanisms used, all of that stuff. Nobody puts it all together the way Václav Smil does. And so this reporter for the New York Times Magazine contacted him to interview him. And it's actually kind of unusual that Smil even grants an interview. He rarely does. I have a good friend who has an energy blog and an energy podcast who contacted Smil, and Smil wouldn't even do an interview with him. But in this one, perhaps Smil realized, okay, this is with a very, very major media outlet. We'll give it a try. And this reporter basically was trying to get Smil to say, yes, we have this catastrophic problem of climate change facing us, and we absolutely have to switch over rapidly from fossil fuels to wind and solar and other renewables. And Smil just simply refused to do it over and over again. His responses were essentially, look, you're just not being realistic. You're not facing basic facts about where energy comes from, how we take it from its natural form to its useful form. What are the costs of doing that? How long does it take to change an energy infrastructure? And so really it was kind of funny to read this interview, because very clearly the reporter just couldn't get Smil to say what he wanted him to say.
Very interesting indeed. Okay, so obviously this is the mantra that we keep hearing, which is that climate change is presenting an imminent danger to our very existence, and we must act now to save the planet by replacing fossil fuels with renewable green energy sources. So green energy advocates believe that this can be done quickly and without negatively affecting the economy. So how do you see it, Cal?
Well, to quote Smil here from that very interview, he said, people have to realize that this problem is unprecedented because of the numbers, billions of everything, and the pressure of acting rapidly as we never acted before. This doesn't make it hopeless, but it makes it excruciatingly more difficult. Let me give you just one sort of an illustration of that. Over the period of roughly 2008 to 2016, solar energy received 3,500 times as much in the way of subsidies and tax incentives from the US government as did any of the fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. Nevertheless, today, solar provides under 1% of all the electricity generated in the United States, and electricity is only a small part of the total energy used in the United States. So those people who think, oh yeah, we're going to just make enough solar panels, we're going to put up enough wind turbines to replace all the energy we get from coal, oil, and natural gas, they're nuts. Wind and solar together today produce less than 3% of all the energy used in the United States. On a worldwide basis, they produce less than 1% of all the energy used. And fossil fuels provide roughly 85% of all the energy used. Run of river hydro in huge dams provides a fair amount. Nuclear provides a fair amount. You put those together with fossil fuels, you're well over 95%. And then you actually have wood and dry dung providing more energy than wind and solar.
Wow, it sounds like we would need a whole ton of solar panels all across the world. These are just developing nations too. So realistically, how long would it take for the many, many developing nations of the world to get to a place of having sufficient green energy to function on? And who would actually pay for that, considering they have much higher priorities, such as providing proper health care and food for their citizens?
Yeah, the answer to how long is forever. There was a really interesting article just recently, actually a paper, a refereed paper, asking would it be possible to provide all of the electricity for Germany with solar panels in Spain, Spain having the best sun conditions of any place in Europe? And the answer was no. That first of all, we don't have enough of the very rare earths and precious metals necessary for making solar panels to produce that many solar panels just for the use of Germany, let alone for all the countries all around the world to produce their electricity that way. But second, we don't have enough land. It takes hundreds of times as much land space covered with solar panels to produce the same amount of energy as you need from either as the land needed from using either nuclear or natural gas or coal. And so we just simply don't have that much land available. And that's the kind of point that Smil makes. I mean, this is a man who's written more than 40 books in this field, teaches at a university in Canada, and he came out of what used to be Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. But he came out of there, grew up under communism, and he knew what it was to have a government that simply said, this is what we're going to do, and it doesn't matter whether the market works, doesn't matter whether the real world works that way. And he just refuses to bow down to the prevailing narrative.
Mm-hmm. Now, that New York Times interviewer asked Smil if there aren't maybe credible pathways to decarbonizing the grid. So what was his reply to that?
Well, yeah, Smil said, Germany, after nearly $500 billion, in 20 years, they went from getting 84% of their primary energy from fossil fuels to getting 76%. Can you tell me, and I'm still quoting Smil here, can you tell me how you'd go from 76% fossil to zero by 2030 or 2025? I'm sorry, the reality is what it is. Now, I'll add to that. Germany was picking the low-hanging fruit in these first 20 years and spending $500 billion. They took the easiest parts of their energy infrastructure to replace with wind and solar, primarily wind for Germany, because Germany just doesn't get that terribly much sun. But they took the easier parts. For the next, say, let's see, they went from 84 to 76%, so 12% drop in fossil fuels. For the next 12%, they're going to be working on the harder fruit to reach, higher up on the tree. That's going to cost more. For the following 12%, it's going to cost even more than that. So this is just simply not realistic at all. The Biden administration in the United States wants us to go to net zero by 2050 and to 50% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. It's not going to happen. I mean, my own article, I closed up with a quote from Thomas Robert Malthus, the the originator of Malthusianism, the notion that the world is overpopulated and we're running out of resources and we have to contain population, which is itself wrong. And he admitted it in the third edition of his work. But, well, first edition is what's famous. But some 200 years ago, Malthus wrote, "What cannot be done will not be done," which seems to me to make good sense.
It was interesting. Now, Cal, to be fair, many, of course, argue that setting green goals is a necessary thing if you want to achieve them at some point. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as Smil put it in response to this interviewer, it's not helpful to set goals that cannot be met. It's not helpful to set purely idealistic goals. Goals need to be at least plausibly reachable in order for them to motivate actual hard work and action to achieve them. And Smil is saying, no, the goals that are being set, whether it's 50% reduction by 2030 or net zero by 2050, the goals are being set are simply not possible. And what that means is that as people fail to achieve them, as they fail to get the impossible done, then they lose hope. And hope is essential to humanity making major achievements. So if you want to destroy hope, you set unreachable goals, then you fail to reach them, and people give up. That's not what we want.
Interesting. Now, getting back to Smil for a moment here, Smil states that developing countries actually need to increase and not decrease their use of fossil fuels to build their infrastructures, right? So can you explain why you believe that this is the case?
Well, in a lot of developing countries, the primary source of energy for the large majority of people is either wood or dried dung. That's especially the case in sub Saharan Africa, where under 20% of the people have access to electricity. And even those who do have it only on an intermittent basis. It's not reliable, and most can't afford it. So when you've got people using wood and dried dung as their primary energy source, you realize what this means is indoor air pollution from the smoke of the fires over which they cook their food. It means huge problems with respiratory disease and like. The World Health Organization years ago calculated that this is killing between 2 and 4 million people every year. And those places, frankly, you could build the world's dirtiest coal-fired power plant right next to the hut of some family that's been burning wood and dried dung to cook its food and heat the hut overnight. And that family would be much better off from the electricity generated by that plant than it is from the tiny bit of energy that it gets from the wood and dried dung. It would have far less pollution, and it would have all the things that electricity can do for you that mere heat can't. So what really needs to happen is that the developing world has to go from the primitive energy system, which my friend Dr. John Christie, a climatologist who used to be a missionary in Nigeria, I think it was, said the primitive energy system is wood and dried dung carried on the backs of sub-Saharan African women, average 6 to 8 hours per woman per day spent just doing that. We need to go to the modern energy system, which is electricity generated by coal and natural gas or nuclear or even oil generating stations. That cleans their lives, and it provides them the energy that is indispensable to their rising and staying out of poverty.
My goodness. Okay, so really quickly, looking into the future, where are we going to be 20 years from now?
Well, I will probably not still be alive by then, but my guess is that we will still be, the world will still be getting at least 80% of its energy from fossil fuels 20 years from now, unless, of course, the opposition to nuclear dissipates a great deal, in which case nuclear is far and away the safest energy source that we have. And it's the cleanest energy source that we have, with the possible exception of run of river hydro. And that could make a difference. The problem is you're going to have a huge change in the attitude of the environmentalist movement toward nuclear to do that. Barring that, fossil fuels are going to continue to be the primary energy source for the world for at least the next 50 or 60 years, probably the next 100 years or more.
I guess time will tell. Hopefully, you'll be around to see it. As will I, all of us. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for being with us, Cal.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Dr. Cal Beisner is the national spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance, a conservative Christian public policy group.